Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Tips and Tricks in Configuration Console webinar as presented by our very own Desi Howes. Before we start, I want to introduce a new idea we're going to do with this webinar, which we haven't done in the past. I want to make sure everybody's paying attention to what Desi has to say. So what we're going to do is at the very end, we'll do a single question quiz. And whoever can answer that correctly the quickest, and I'll tell you how you can do that, will win the Amazon gift card. And we'll just email that to you. So before we begin, I'm just going to do a very quick Nogalis company overview for those of you who are not familiar with who we are. I see a lot of familiar faces, so probably not a whole lot of you that don't know who we are, but very quickly, we're an Infor Alliance partner. We're also an Amazon Web Services and a Microsoft partner. And the way we work with customers is really kind of in three different ways. We have our managed service or managed support where we work with Infor customers, either Lawson or Cloud Suite, either on-prem or in the cloud. And with some other Infor products like XM, customers have seen a 40% reduction in maintenance costs, and this is all verifiable by talking to them, 98% reduction in downtime, so basically down to zero, and we're 100% US-based, lots of referenceable customers you can talk to if you're interested in moving the workload of managing Lawson off your staff and onto us. Our consulting services, so that's where we help Lawson and Cloud Suite customers implement the applications, functional and technical. We do a lot of mergers and acquisition work with, especially with a lot of healthcare customers recently, and education and insurance and whatnot. We've done a lot of cloud migrations. We do a lot of custom reporting, analytics, and web and mobile application development. And the latest and greatest thing is our serverless application development. So if you're looking to go serverless with your next app, definitely talk to us. And then last but not least, in fact, most important, is our Lawson Archive solution. This is the newest product that we're working with a lot of customers on, and I'll just let this video quickly explain what that is.
Are you maintaining a Lawson system for archive reasons only? Upkeeping an old ERP system for data retention can be difficult and costly. There's hardware and software maintenance and licenses, data center real estate and energy costs, backup, storage, disaster recovery, internal and third-party staff costs. You're also taking some big risks. Outdated components like WebSphere, Java pose security risks.
Oh, sorry about that.
Upkeeping old browser support is extremely cumbersome. User access gets more challenging each year. A simple hardware failure can wipe everything out in an instance. There's a much better way. APIX Data Archive by Nogalis makes it possible to migrate all your data to the cloud, provide your users with a simple, lightweight web interface, gives you the freedom to decommission your Lawson application servers forever. Step 1. We migrate 100% of your Lawson data to a cloud database. Step 2. We deploy our serverless solution. Step 3. We set up security for your users and provide them access to your data. Highlights: fully managed fixed cost solution for data archive. 100% serverless with nothing to maintain or break. Satisfies even the toughest data retention requirements. Provide access to all your data in a way that is intuitive both to existing Lawson users and to those who have never used Lawson. Visit Nogalis.com to find out more about APIX Lawson Data Archive today.
So that's kind of the breadth of our products and services and how we work with customers. If you're interested in APIX, which is the archive solution you just saw, you can contact me directly, tan@nogalis.com, and or go to our website and contact us through that link. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and get to Tips and Tricks in Configuration Console by Desi. So this is where you're going to learn how to customize the user experience in all your landmark applications with the configuration console. We'll show you how to create user fields, how to bring data from a related business class into a form, and more. So Desi, I will stop sharing and you can take it away. And don't forget, everybody, pay attention so you can participate in that quiz for the $50 Amazon gift card. It's going to come right from Desi's presentation.
Okay, hi everybody. As Tan mentioned, I am Desi House and I have been supporting Infor products for about 10 years. Most of what I do is installations, interfaces between various applications, and custom development. So that is how I have gotten into the configuration console and learn more about that. So I want to share some of the things that I have learned with you all today. So thank you all for being here. I want to apologize in advance if I have to clear my throat a lot, because it seems like I always do these things when my allergies are attacking me, and that is what's happening today. So I apologize if I have to clear my throat today. Okay, so let's get started. There we go. Okay, so what we're going to go over today, we're just going to go over the very basics of configuration console, describe what it is, how to get there, and describe the various elements that you can configure. This is not a complete list of what can be configured in configuration console. It is very big and very powerful, so it will probably take several webinars to go through everything that you can touch in there. But today we'll go over menus, pages, web applications. One of my favorite things is configuring user fields. It's very useful. Forms. Another one of my favorites is relations and actions. And then we'll discuss, if you have an oopsie, what you can do to revert your changes. So what is configuration console? This is a proprietary component with Infor. It uses a proprietary language that they wrote called landmark pattern language. It provides you with the ability to customize the landmark application by adding either new user interface components or customizing existing user interface components. You can take your landmark applications and completely change them using configuration console if you wanted to. And it basically, it's a customization sitting on top of the base form. So you don't actually lose the delivered utilities by Infor, and patching and things are not an issue. It's similar to Design Studio, not the same. If you're a Lawson customer, it's similar to Design Studio, where patches and things like that are not going to impact your changes. Other things that we're not going to get to today, but hopefully in the future, because they are larger items, is security configuration. So you can use configuration console to modify security classes. You can add rules or create new security classes and customize security for your needs. I'm sure you can imagine that's a real big one and needs its own webinar, if not multiple webinars. You can also configure web services and application settings such as MIME types, time zones, and things like that. You can make things unavailable, for instance, so that users can't upload specific document types and things like that. So the very basic, how do we get there? So I just want to make a note that all the screenshots that you're going to see today are from Rich Client. And I am aware, and I'm sure all of you are aware, that Rich Client is decommissioning probably, I think it's in about a year from now. And they are quickly moving everything that you can do in Rich Client. They're quickly moving to the web UI. The web UI is not absolutely 100% yet. And I do use the web UI for a lot of things because I do actually find it to be more efficient in most cases. But whenever I'm doing configuration console, I just always immediately go to Rich Client. So I also am going to have to get used to going to the web UI at some point. But for today, our screenshots are coming from Rich Client. So if you want to get there from the start menu, you go Start, Configure Application, and that'll open up the application configuration screen. Or you can get there from a form. If you are on a form and you want to configure it right then and there, you do the Control, Shift, and left click of the mouse on that form, and it'll pop up the form information, and you can click the configure link, and it'll take you right to a new configuration for that form. The basic buttons in configuration console. If you have any Landmark products or familiar with Landmark products, you've seen all of these. The little blank sheet is what you would click if you want to create a new configuration. The typical save and delete button is there. I will say, if you open up a configuration and you make a change and then you try to exit, probably 9 times out of 10, it will warn you that you're exiting without saving changes. But on some of the configurations, it won't warn you. So the way that you can know if you've made changes is if that little save button is hot, if it isn't grayed out like it is there. So you want to make sure you save your changes before you leave. And then the delete button, it will delete the configuration that you're working in. So if you open up a new form configuration and make some changes, and then you go to delete that, it will just delete the configuration. So it's not going to delete anything delivered by Infor. So you're safe to delete as far as not removing things delivered by Infor, but do keep in mind that once you delete, then you lose that whole configuration. So any changes you've made will be gone. And to configure the selected item, you would hit the configure button, and that will show you a graphical representation of your form or your user field or whatever you're configuring, and you can make changes there. Or you can go into the nitty gritty and edit the LPL by clicking the little pencil button. And something that's good about the LPL is that it will highlight with the little red squiggly if your syntax isn't right. The message isn't always 100% intuitive, and sometimes it's a little cryptic, but at least gives you a start to let you know that your syntax isn't quite right. And sometimes the messages are very helpful. Okay, so things that we can configure. The first thing, menus. You can do some pretty basic configuration on menus. You can move items around. You can delete menu items. You can make menus unavailable to users. And the point of this would be just so that when your users are opening up menus, they only see really what they need. So if there are items that you don't use, you could just take them off the menu, and that way you don't have people clicking on them when they aren't used. It's a pretty basic configuration. Okay, what can I configure? So you can configure pages. You can add columns to pages. You can kind of move things around a little bit. You can add fields. You can add compute fields. You can also use the LPL editor for this one, but it works a little bit differently. When you're editing the page, you click the pencil and it opens up a graphical interface for you to move things around. And then you can click the LPL editor at the bottom if you want to edit it in LPL. So this is good for pages that when users come in, sometimes the data that's delivered by Infor isn't everything that they need to see, or it's more than what they need to see. So this is where you can come in and make changes to that to make it a little bit more user-friendly. Another thing is web applications. There's not a whole lot that you can do with web applications, but one of the more useful things is if you want the landing page, the home page, to be a custom home page, you can edit that. And the same thing, you can edit the LPL, but again, it's not quite as flexible as some of the other things that you can configure in Configuration Console. So one of my favorites is user fields. And what I have found personally is that the basic user field and the derived user field are probably my two biggest go-tos, because either you need a very basic field, a very common field, or you need something more complex, which is where the derived comes in. So user fields, what's really cool about user fields is that this is data that is stored in the database once you create this field, and it's reportable. It can be used in Spreadsheet Designer. So once you create this field, it is associated with that business class. So you can pull it in, like I said, with Spreadsheet Designer, you can pull it into Landmark queries. So really neat. So it functions just like a field once you add it. The basic field to do that, you would select the field type of field. And on your business class, whatever business class you're adding it to, you can give it a default label. And then when you add it to a form, you have the ability to change that label. You can say what type it is, and you can say whether it's optional required or conditionally required. If it's conditionally required, then you would add a condition, and you can set the initial and default values, and those can be constants or literals. So very, very useful. Some other types of user fields, there's a snapshot, which is basically what it sounds like. It's a snapshot of another field in the system. You can only set up snapshots of fields that are related to the business class where you're working, and you can set conditions on them so that that field would only be populated when those conditions are met. And a condition field is a true false type of field. So if you wanted to say is active, or let's say you made a field that was is greater than 15, and so then the condition, you would check and see if this item is greater than 15, and if it is, then you would return true, the value of true. So that's what these condition fields are expecting. It either has to be true or false, and you can add multiple conditions to check the status of that field. And the compute fields are basically what it sounds like. It's you can do mathematical equations, you can take sums, you can add and subtract, you can add and subtract days so that you can get like an age type of thing, or get different dates, different functionality on dates. So that's a compute field. And then what I have found to be very useful is derived fields. So these are, you have a little bit more control over these, and that's probably why I like them, because I'm a developer at heart. So I'm able to control these a little bit more. You can add logic to return the exact value that you need in these fields. And so for instance, the first example, it's basically what it's doing is it's converting a date to a string. And then that way later I can take a substring of that string. So that's the second example, is returning a substring. And then finally, there's one that just has a ton of logic thrown in there, testing a bunch of conditions and returning a value based on those conditions. And just what you need to remember is you're always going to return, that's that return keyword. You're going to return a single value, but you need to make sure if you are using conditions that every condition returns a value, or else you're going to get an error. Forms are another good thing to configure. And in this case, I'm setting default values on one of the fields, but there's a lot of things you can do with forms. Actually, you can make changes to what happens when the form is loaded or when certain conditions are met. You can see I've got the two different ways of looking at the form. So on the left, that's where I click the configure button, and that's what I was telling you. It shows you a graphical type of interface, and on the left side, that's the layout of the form. So you can click on one of those fields, and then on the right side, you can make changes to that field. And on the right example, that shows you the LPL. So it's exactly the same thing. You click into that form, and then you can go down, and that is the LPL. That is the code that drives this form, and you can set initial values there. And this is where you can go in and make changes to actions and when the screen loads and things like that. Relations are also very useful. This is how you can take two business classes that aren't, if you're on a form and you're trying to get to data that isn't readily available to that business class, you can relate those two business classes so that you can get to that data. So the relation type of one-to-one, if you choose one-to-one, that means that all of your values will have to be mapped in the key. So you have to have a source value for each of your key fields if you're doing a one-to-one, because that, like it says, it's going to return one record of your secondary business class for each record in your primary business class. You can also choose one-to-many there. And in that case, you don't have to populate all the key fields, but you need to keep in mind that it will pull back. It potentially could pull back multiple records. So if you're just trying to populate one field, you're going to have to narrow down those records to one. Oh, or you could use that to populate a list, which would also be a useful way to use a relation. On the form, you can see in the second screen, I'm using a relation here. So candidate and work assignment aren't necessarily always going to be related, but for our purposes, we needed to relate them. And so once I set up that relation where candidate is now related to work assignment, now I can get to any field in a work assignment from the candidate, which is available to the job application business class, which is where we are in this case. So that can be really useful. It can open up a whole new world to you when you're doing your configurations. Actions, you can also configure, you can add entrance rules, so things that should happen when the action first loads, and then you can also have exit rules, so things that can happen when the action is released. And most often an action is going to be released to go open up or run an IPA flow, right? So like typically an approval flow. So you can actually add parameters to your action if you need extra parameters going to that flow. And then you can also set the required fields. You can choose if you want to require more or less than what's delivered, then you can make those changes also. So, very good. And then finally, how do I revert my changes? So I made a change and it isn't working, or we'd want to back it out. We don't want to use it. The really cool thing about configuration console is it automatically stores all your version sources. So you don't have to do anything to set this up. It's automatically stored from now until all the way back to the beginning of time. So the very, very first change that was ever made to this form or this component, that will be stored. So to get to that, whenever you click the item on the left side and you see the basic information about the form or the component, you can click view history and then select the history drop down, and you can choose the date that you want to go back to. And then on the left side of the screen is going to be the information or the way the form looked on that date. And then the right side of the screen is the way the form looks today, the LPL. If you want to go back to the date that you have chosen, you would click the revert button and the save button, and that will take you right back to where you were, like it never happened. This is a great tool, and it's great that it keeps everything, so you really don't have to worry about making changes and testing things out, because you can always easily go back. So that's what I have for you today. And I just want to talk a little bit about the documentation that Infor provides on docs.infor.com. There are some links here for you to kind of get you started, but Infor actually provides really good documentation on configuration console and LPL. They have some examples. They describe what all the components are that you can configure, and it's a great jumping off point. So they don't have a lot of complex things that you can do, but it at least kind of gets you started and helps you to get a feel for how things work. And LPL documentation is really good for understanding the syntax of LPL. So I highly recommend, if you want to start learning configuration console, that you go to their documentation and start browsing through it. And if you have any specific questions, just use the search function, which is also very good to pull up their documentation on the various components. And then always go to our website. The news events portion of our website will have articles that my colleagues and I have written on all different Infor products, and then this webinar and other webinars will also be available there. So very good resource for you. And then anytime you have a quick question or want to pick my brain, please send me an email. I'm happy to answer questions, happy to help you guys get started on this stuff or whatever else you're curious about. So do we have any questions today? Oh, I see. Okay. Do you have a scenario when you would use a snapshot field and what differentiates it? That's an excellent question because I haven't figured out what makes that any better than the other types of fields. And probably, honestly, I would use a derived field if I was gonna do anything more complex than a basic field. I'm almost always going to use a derived field. So that is an excellent question about what makes a snapshot field better than anything else. And I personally have not figured out why you would use that over a derived field. Are there any other questions? Yes, so the question came across, can I still use Rich Client? You can until they decommission it. And then I think it probably would be like anything else where their Infor just isn't going to support or update it anymore. So I'm sure you could continue to use it, but once you start updating your landmark applications, that's eventually you're not going to be able to use it anymore. Are there any limitations to using configuration console for the web? I don't know the specific limitations. I can't tell you all that, but I do know that there are some limitations. You just kind of find them as you're working in there. And but Infor is working fast and furious to get everything into the web UI. So if you're wanting to get started with configuration console, I would start with the web UI. And if it looks like you're missing something, then maybe open it up in Rich Client and see if it's available there. And Infor has separated out their documentation for the web UI and Rich Client. So definitely go and look at their documentation for both and to kind of give you a start there. Is LPL the source code for the landmark applications? I don't know if it's at the very, very base, but yes, they do write their own stuff using LPL. For cloud customers, do you recommend the configurations be checked? Oh, yes, always, always check your configurations after the monthly updates, whether you're cloud or not. When there's a patch done, I mean, it still could be similar to Design Studio where they add a field or move a field around, and that could affect your configuration. So as a good practice, you should always check your configurations after any kind of update, along with your regular testing when you're doing updates. Let's see. If a menu, form, or field is restricted by configuring the application, however, a security class is granting the access, what takes precedence? I am going to research this. I think it's the configuration console would take precedence. But Ray, I'm going to take this offline and I'll find your email and I will give you an answer to that question, a real good answer, because I don't want to give you the wrong answer. Okay. These are all great questions. I really appreciate this, you guys.
Okay, and if you have additional questions, guys, you can always email Desi directly. It's desi@nogalis.com, DESI@nogalis.com. And with that, we're gonna go ahead and do the quiz. Let's see here. I think I'm on screen 3. Oh, this screen. All right, so I'm about to display the question. It's a very easy question. So the trick's going to be whoever sends the answer to Angelique quicker is going to win. And we'll just do this by email. And here's the question. So just go ahead and send your reply to Angeli@nogalis.com. And Angeli, I'll let me know who that was. It's an easy question, so we're going to have a lot of people answering it, I'm sure. So if you don't get a reply, it means you were not first in. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the webinar here. The recording will be available either later today or tomorrow. We'll email you all with a link to where it is. Thanks everybody for joining the webinar. Really appreciate it, and hope to see you on the next one.
Thank you, everybody.